Hello, everyone, and welcome to Pre-Shift, tidbits of wisdom for everyday service. My name is TJ Griffin, and I'm the corporate wine educator for Winebow. We welcome your questions at any point during the webinar, but please use the Q&A rather than the chat bar to submit them. Now, let me introduce your host. Master Sommelier Ron Edwards is a husband, a father, a surfer, and, as can be seen in the window, a lover of bow ties. He has almost 30 years of hospitality experience, and since 2018, he has been the director of wine education for Winebow. And now, here to discuss today's topic, the theory of relativity, Mr. Ron Edwards.
Hey, TJ. Hey, everybody. So good to be back with you. Excited to talk about this topic. Great to have TJ along as well, as always. I'm only completely jealous of his radio voice. I just have to deal with mine instead. It just is the way it is. So thank you for the kind introduction, sir.
You are welcome.
All right. So the theory of relativity, well, it means a lot in physics, and certainly Einstein had a lot to say that I don't even come close to understanding, but it also has a lot to do with the way we introduce wines to people in the hospitality environment, the way we can move them along the path of exploration in a very comfortable way. And so we're going to focus on the critical technique of relating one wine to another. This whole idea of relativity, even if the title didn't make sense to you, this is what we're going for. And so it really starts to boil down to this idea that in the idea of relativity, you and I could be sitting in a car driving down the road at 75 miles an hour, very peaceful, blissful. And if we don't look outside the windows, we actually our bodies feel like we're sitting still, because relative to us, we are still. But if we look out the window, we now see relative to the outside environment that we're moving at 75 miles an hour. If somebody outside of the vehicle is looking in on us and they're standing still, we look like we're going at breakneck speed. But while we're sitting there in our peaceful environment, we feel like we're not moving. It's a very interesting concept. And this idea that I'm going to propose to you is to take the idea of relativity in grapes and put people in the car with you so that they feel at ease and comfortable with where they're going, even if they've never been there before. And one of the things we have to do is think about, what does my guest already know? What do they drink at home by choice? Are they ready to explore? And are they more cautious than they are explorative? Those are the ideas that are wrapped all in this. And the other side of it is studying and tasting and exploring wine enough to know how grapes beyond the critical five, Chardonnay, Cabernet, Pinot Grigio, Pinot Noir, beyond those, what else is out there and how do they relate to the critical five that people mostly know? So that's where we're heading today. Hopefully you're excited to be along.
Ron, that sounds like an awful lot to accomplish tableside. How do you have time to find all that out?
Well, it's sort of like when we teach tasting at the introductory courses, and we spend 30 minutes on what a wine looks like. And in reality, we spend 15 seconds looking at it in an analysis. This is going to be a long discussion about something you have to do very quickly. There is definitely time to do this, but it only has its efficacy if you're coming to the table with a plan, if you're using it in the right moment, in the right context. This is not something that I'm not telling you to do this the first time you walk to the table. Because if somebody looks up at you and they say, "I'll have a glass of Cabernet," your options are pretty limited at that point as to what you're going to discuss, right, TJ? It's like, okay, well, right here on the wine list, you'll see our two wines by the glass that are Cabernet Sauvignon. But if you'd like to explore something, these two wines, I think you'll like just as much, and let you try something new. And then they make a decision from there. And that's about as far as you can go in the "I just told you what I want" scenario. This is more applied to the idea that you're coming back to the table, or you're given the opportunity right at the beginning where somebody says to you, "I like X, recommend a wine for me." Or the old famous thing that happens in a lot of wine programs, because we're trying to offer something new, or because we're just dealing with a broad base of customers who have a very broad base of experience. They look at the wine list, they don't know anything that you're selling, and they say, "I really don't recognize any of these wines. Could you recommend something for me?" That's the world that this applies to. Does that make sense, DJ?
Absolutely.
And in that environment, you have to have this plan already in place. The more you practice it, the easier it is. And the more you know, which is why we got to stay in the books, which is why we have to keep learning as professionals, the more you know about wine, regions, and grapes, the easier this process becomes. So what does my guest drink at home? That's honestly, I would ask them that straight out. And this is really beaten into my head by the idea that TJ and I talked offline about, is that what the guest asks for is not necessarily what you think they're asking for. Long time ago, I was waiting tables in college. I was getting relatively good at it at the time, and I was getting a little overconfident, as happens with us. And a woman and her husband sat down, and she said, "I would like a glass of sweet red wine." And I knew my wine list pretty well at that point, and there were no traditional wines on the menu that would qualify as red and sweet. And I took her at her word and spent the next 15 minutes trying to figure out what to serve her by letting her taste things. None of them were what she was asking for. And finally, I asked the question that I now ask immediately. What do you drink at home? And she said, Cabernet Sauvignon from California. I was like, oh, I'll be right back. So her idea of sweet, my idea of sweet, completely different things. And so we can eliminate this lack of cohesive language when we talk to our guests very quickly by asking better questions and not taking them at face value. When somebody says to me, I like a dry, and then fill in the blank, they're actually telling me they like a wine that's drying most of the time, meaning it leaves their mouth dry rather than mouth watering, which is a different experience than a mouth watering wine. So if somebody says, I like a dry Chardonnay from California, I know that they're talking about a wine that is elevated alcohol, probably aged in a significant amount of oak, and not very tart. Because if it was very tart, it would be mouth watering and not drying, because they use the word as the effect on them. We use the word in the wine world as lacking in residual sugar. So what do you drink at home avoids a lot of that. They can tell you what I drink at home, and hopefully you'll know enough about what they drink at home that you can then start a conversation with them. The common answers that I've gotten along the way is really all the way to don't really drink wine at home. Okay, I'm starting on a blank slate. That doesn't help me very much. Or they give you they're afraid to tell you what they drink at home because they're afraid you'll judge them for it. You know, when I first got into the wine business, White Zinfandel was all the rage in people who were new to wine or people who just liked sweet beverages. And it was not unusual for someone to be very hesitant to tell me, hey, I like White Zinfandel. But it's easier if they tell me that than not tell me that. And remember, as a server, as a manager, as a sommelier, the fact that they want to drink any wine at all is better than not drinking wine. It's better for your bottom line. It's better for your check averages, and it's better for their time in the restaurant because it adds to their evening. So your reaction to what they say is super important. You have to absorb it and be kind and gracious and say, well, that's fabulous. Now I know something about what you like, as opposed to the face that they expect you to say when they mention something that is either down market or ordinary by consideration of the greater wine world, even though they are perfectly fine with it as a beverage, as they should be.
But so you reference White Zinfandel, which isn't as common anymore, especially on premise. But what do you do if they throw something at you like that? Like say, oh, at home we always drink that Moscato that comes in the cans. Do you have something like that?
And hopefully I will, but that at least gives me a place. What do we know when they've said that? We know that they like wine with residual sugar. They don't drink wine that's high in alcohol. They probably drink it very cold and refreshing. Okay, great. Well, I normally will have Moscato d'Asti by the glass in any beverage program that I run because it's great with desserts and it's perfect for this scenario right here. I might move them along a path of maybe I have a demi-sec Vouvray that I could recommend to them that is lower in alcohol, served cold, has residual sugar. I would take that knowing the componentry of what they're drinking and then apply it to the rest of the world, because when we don't know, once we know what they drink at home, or we can have this conversation, now we know, all right, we get some knowns here, right? If we talk about geography and places, these three pictures are places that most people can identify. TJ, you got all of these? You know them from, let's see, you're looking at the screen from left to right?
I have been to two of these places, but I really want to get to the one on the left.
Ah, what's the one on the left?
Is that the Opera House in Sydney, Australia?
Very good. So you've got the Opera House in Sydney and San Francisco and Paris, right? These are known locations in the world that people who know much about or anything about cities in the world can identify these three pictures most 2 out of 3, 3 out of 3. So we have some grapes that are like that, right? That people who drink wine have probably had Chardonnay, have probably had Pinot Grigio, have probably had Cabernet Sauvignon, have probably had Pinot Noir. They may not have liked any of them. They may have liked all of them, but they have had them. And so we want to talk with our guest about some of those knowns, establish a rapport with them about, the idea of, oh, well, okay, I see that you like, maybe instead of telling you they drink the canned Moscato at home, maybe they say to you, I drink Rombauer Chardonnay at home. Awesome. Great. So what do we know? We know they like Chardonnay. We know they like West Coast style Chardonnay of North America. We know that they like rich fruit and noticeable flavors driven by oak and malolactic transformation. Okay, so for the geeks in the world, they know what I'm talking about. For those of you who might not know what all that means, that's buttery, creamy, noticeable alcohol, not over alcohol, but noticeable, and certainly the overtones of oak, cinnamon, clove, allspice, caramel, etc. And then a rich fruit profile. Instead of it being green apple, it's ripe pear, it's ripe pineapple. So in general, we're talking about a wine that's really friendly. So what other friendly wines can I go? Well, the first thing I would ask them is, okay, great. So I see you like Chardonnay. That's fabulous. Do you only drink wines from North America / United States, or do you explore the rest of the world a bit? And if they say, no, we only drink California, then I know that what they are used to is that ripe, more towards lush style of wine. And if I'm going to stay in their comfort zone, I have to recommend something near that. So it might not have to be from California, right? We could venture to Mendoza, we could go to Chile, we could go to South Africa, we could go to Australia and get similar styles. But to take them into Chablis and recommend a Chardonnay, that would be too far down the path, most likely. If they are in that idea of like, well, yeah, I know I like Pinot Grigio, but I don't really know. I can't really think of anything else I've tried. Okay, well, then we kind of like give them a list. Okay, Pinot Grigio. A lot of people serve Chardonnay when you visit homes. Have you ever had one of those? Oh, yeah, I didn't like that. Oh, okay. So maybe we're finding out that they don't really like the flavor of oak, or they don't like the richness that comes with Chardonnay. Did anybody ever let you try a Sauvignon Blanc? And they're like, yeah, maybe, I don't know. And then you start, okay, how about, do you prefer white wine or red? Oh, I really like white. Okay, great. Do you want your wine to be crisp and refreshing, or would you like a rich sort of mouth-coating texture? Do you like the idea of really ripe fruits, or do you like more the idea of citrus? And that interview process is 1 sentence long, and they'll be able to put you in a realm of what kind of wine to recommend to them. Oh, I like crisp. I like citrus. Refreshing sounds great. No, I don't think I want anything that sounds rich. No, I'm not into that. And we can go, okay, great. So we have Pinot Grigio for you, but something super similar that I think you'll really enjoy is this Gruner Veltliner from Austria. It's crisp, it's citrus driven, it's refreshing. The only difference really is that you'll notice this little spiciness to the wine. Not like weird, just like a little spritz. And all of a sudden, Pinot Grigio becomes Gruner Veltliner. They think they've had an amazing experience. You look like a hero, and it was all based on some super simple questions. Most guests can define what textures they like and that overall impression of the wine: crisp, fresh, refreshing, rich, velvety, especially when we start talking about red wines. Somebody says, I like red wine, but I'm not really sure what kind. Start down the path of texture like, oh, is it velvety and really lush on the palate, or is it satiny, or its feelings very elegant and smooth? Those kind of questions will help you a great deal.
Where do you start when a guest, you're talking about when guests are able to answer these questions, but what if you have a guest that's clearly indicated they want to try wine, but they're not able to, they don't know what they really like, or they say they don't know what they like, or they're just not able to articulate what they like? What do you do then?
Yeah, if I can't, this is all time related, right? That guest is going to take a lot more of your time than the one who looked at you and said, I'll have a glass of cab, thanks. So you have to allocate your time in the dining room well. But in those cases, I do everything I can to use comfortable words that I would describe food with, fruit flavors that I feel are common to the audience to whom I'm speaking, right? So there are fruits that are common in North America. Someone acting as a sommelier or a server in Hong Kong would have a different normal set of fruits, right? You might have some super common things like lemon, but then it would branch out from that. Like when I'm in Hawaii, I hear all kinds of different descriptors for wines based on the Hawaiian names for fruit, even though I find out later it's something else I knew. They just call it this over there. So that's key. Keep it simple. Keep it straightforward. Get them on a page of commonality. And the other is let them try something. Bring them 2 wines. Well, do you want to try white or red? Well, I'd like to try red wine. Okay, great. I'm going to bring you 2 wines. You don't have to like either one of them. I'm going to let you taste them while I talk to this table over here. I'm going to come back and we're going to find out if you like one or the other at all, and then go from there. So you hand them the extremes, right? You hand them Pinot Noir, perhaps, and you hand them Cabernet Sauvignon on the other side. And they fall in love with the Pinot Noir, and you say, oh, so what you like is red fruits, and you like a silky texture, and the wine is a little more friendly. The other wine was a little bitter for you. Yeah, it was too attacking, right? And then they actually learn some language that will help them next time. That's the way I handle that. Next thing is we've had this conversation and you're seeing their reactions to your conversation. And those people who are getting really excited and animated and really joining in with you in this conversation are ready to explore. They're ready to break through a boundary. And I always tell people that your job as a hospitality professional is to first try to define the box that the person's taste profile lives in. That includes food and wine and cocktails for that matter, or anything else you're serving. Figure out the box, okay? And then make them comfortable that you understand the box. That's what we were talking about with our common languages, our common language and our common fruit descriptors and things like that. And then when you make a recommendation, keep them in the box, but move them as far as you can to the edges. Because when you get them out to the edge, they feel like they've had an adventure, but yet they still feel comfortable. And when you've done that, you've been very successful. When you have somebody who feels really explorative and they really want to try something new, you can take them to the other side of the box. You can take them, all right, and we're going to go outside the box, but you can't take them too far because that's a lose-lose proposition for both of them. They got really excited. You said you were going to find something they like. You went too far beyond what you know they like. And now you look bad and they feel bad for exploring. We don't want to do that. So get them to the edge, take a little bit outside. That's the goal. So, and the way we do that is, all right, let's put together a list of, in our minds, things that if they say this, I can say this to stay in the box, but on the edge. And then I can say this to get outside the box. And some of that can be grape related. Like I brought up earlier, somebody loves Pinot Grigio. You can introduce them to Gruner Veltliner very successfully almost every time. But it'll feel very adventurous to them, even though they're this close together in the world of wine. The other option is new region or producer. I really like Sonoma County Chardonnay. Oh, awesome. What do we know about Sonoma County Chardonnay, TJ? We know its style. We also know its relative price point, right? If it says Sonoma County or Sonoma Coast or Sonoma Valley on it, it's not going to be the same price as when it says California. So that means that they're in that, mid to the upper teens to mid 30s on the retail shelf, depending on the producer, which means we can now expand to other places. Like I would say, oh, well, then let's go see what we've got off the Australia list, which is also friendly and round and delicious. Or I might take them to South America. Or I might take them to Washington State instead of California, just to keep them in the same genre, but give them a new producer or a new region. That's another way to help them explore very safely. So keeping adventure in context is next.
So you hit upon an important point there. As a sommelier, you not only have to be up on the grapes and the regions, you have to know relative values so you can switch back and forth, which is really important.
Yeah, it's very important to understand the market beyond your own 4 walls. And one of the ways you can keep abreast of that is large-scale tastings when or if we ever get back to those, right? Mm-hmm. And secondly, by just understanding what retailers use as their profit margin. Restaurants and hospitality all work on cost of goods sold, which is a different margin in the retail is the profit. And for whatever reason, hospitality has honed in on using what it costs instead of what you made off of it. And just understanding those differences. So, if this wine is $60 on my wine list, what would it be in the retail store down the street? And because that's what your customers are paying for it to drink it at home. So those are very, very important things. I'm glad you brought that up. So adventuring context, the reason I put these fruits up here for you is like, okay, apples and pears. Those are like so easy, right? Those are the things that are really easy to transition from one to another. If you like a pear, you probably like an apple. If you like an apple, you probably like a pear. They're pretty similar flavors. But staying in fruit and moving from an apple to a pomegranate or a kiwi, that's a significant change. And then, so now we're talking about pushing people to the edge of the boundary in that middle section. And then dragon fruit, wow, that's like, okay, I'm outside the box now. I have no idea if they're really going to like it, but I'm pretty sure they're going to like it. And they seem up for the challenge or up for the adventure. And so as we are making our recommendations, we need to keep this thought in context. Where am I going to center? I'm going to stay in the apples and pears world. Am I going to get them into a slightly more exotic fruit, or am I going to go way off the map? And the only way you know how to do that is the previous conversations with them. How comfortable are they with you so far? So let's start with something easy. They like Chardonnay. Okay, great. If they like Chardonnay and you want to move them to the edge of that white basket where it's still sort of apples and pears, but a little different, you could suggest Viognier, depending on the Viognier, of course. But in general, Viognier, it's similar texture, a lot of the same fruits, just a little more floral. And you introduce that by saying, I'd like you to try this Viognier. It's kind of like Chardonnay with flowers. Moving into the middle section, now we're talking about similar textures and some of the same fruits with Arnase, Fiano, and the Sirtico. Which of those three you recommend depends on what they've said. If they are honing in on the idea that they really like buttery, they like a lot of texture, they like a lot of this, then you're going to have to talk them back out of the idea of oak. You're going to have to explain the difference between Chardonnay and oak, because most people just think that Chardonnay tastes like that because it's so commonly aged in barrels that creamy, buttery, malolactic thing and the spice rack that comes from the barrels is considered part of the flavor profile. Well, Fiano has the texture. There are Assyrticos with oak. That's a natural transition. And Arnase is just a little bit lighter. So you have those words like, hey, I'm going to recommend to you that you try this wine because it's similar texture. It's a little lighter. We're going to take out the creamy buttery, but we're going to keep a very friendly fruit profile. And then if you want to take them outside into the dragon fruit world, a Smaragd level Gruner Veltliner from Austria will bring you all that richness that you get out of big, bold Chardonnay, but it's going to give you a different flavor profile. So there you're saying, I'm going to keep you comfortable in texture, but I'm going to challenge you on flavor profile. And if you keep the wine in context of flavor that they like and dislike, you're in good shape. And the other is, wow, how much does your menu matter at this point, right? So if you have a dish on the menu that's absolutely perfect with Arnase, and you know they like Chardonnay, you can bridge that gap with a little bit of description and a whole lot of context of that one dish. So let's say they say to you White Zinfandel or today's version of that, the Moscato that's stacked in retails and definitely is residual sugar wine. You can push them into, if you have it, Rosé d'Anjou, which is blush. It's off-dry French rosé, so it's perfect for them. If you can get them just a little further towards dragon fruit for their palate, because they're not used to tartness, the Spätlese Auslese Riesling from Germany, where you're going to explain to them that it's going to be like lemonade or limeade, where there's going to be sugar and tartness. And you keep them in that context, they'll normally be fine with it. And then Demi-Sec Vouvray, as we mentioned earlier, is a great opportunity there. If you think they're ready and you have the food to mitigate the idea of dry wine on a sweet wine palate person, then you can go into things like Argentine Malbec Rosé is often very lush, sometimes even a smidge of residual sugar. And then one of the wines we sell here is Yea's 14 to 18 hour rosé of Ayurvedico, which is very friendly and really wonderful with food. I know I've tried Pinot Noir and I like it. Okay, great. You should transition very easily into Dolcetto. It's a little drier, but similar fruit. Tempranillo, a little richer, but very friendly. Grenache, a little spice on my Pinot Noir. Sangiovese, a little drying, but similar. But you're going to push them a little further and get out in Nebbiolo. Now it's a lot more bitter. It's the same tartness, but the bitterness will be hard for them. Or you're moving them into a new flavor profile where they'll like the weight of the wine, but they have to be warned about the kind of herbal accent of Zweigelt or something like that. And then, one of the ways that I often have gotten people to try things beyond their love of Napa, which is a great wine region. It's just not the only wine region. And they say, I like Napa, but I want to try something new. So my first go-to for Napa is to move them to Bulgari, Italy, where you have almost the exact same structure, similar grapes, and a lot of the same winemaking methods where they still use a fair amount of new oak, and it feels very familiar to them. And so that's a really easy thing. And then if I can stretch them a little further, depending on the vintage that I have for sale, I'll go to Bordeaux. And then if I've got somebody who's really adventurous, I'll say, I'm going to give you all the tannin you really want, but it's going to be refreshing instead of rich. Let's have a Barolo. So that's how I do this adventure in context thing.
So curveball for you, Ron.
Sure.
You've settled on something that the guest says, that Chardonnay with flowers thing, the Viognier, that sounds really great. I'm going to have that with the braised short ribs with red wine reduction, mushrooms, and polenta. Do you panic? Do you suggest something else?
Well, actually, in the case of Viognier, I wouldn't panic because it has white wine tannin, and which actually can work pretty well with meat. But what I try to do is all of that is holistic conversation with me. I probably would have already talked to them about what they're having for dinner, and I probably would try to keep them in something that's going to work with their food while I'm making the recommendations. But I also I'm much less sensitive to that than I was years ago, because I have come to realize more and more that people drink what they drink and they eat what they eat on a daily basis, right? So they don't go into the wine cellar that they don't have at home to choose just the right bottle of wine for dinner that's being made that night. That's just not how America works. And so letting them, after they've gone on this adventure with me and I've recommended something and they've bought in on it and they're ready to try it, I don't want to rip the sail out from under them and tell them, oh, well, that won't work now that what you're eating. Oftentimes, if people have played very nicely with me and they've done that adventure and then they pick a food item that doesn't work so well with the wine, I'll just walk by and drop an ounce or two off as part of being a sommelier of the wine that's perfect with the dish that I probably could not have sold them. And I'll say, this is a gift from me. I just wanted you to try this wine with this food. Let me know what you think. And sometimes they like it, sometimes they don't. But it also gives them a juxtaposition. So like if they tried the wine at first and then they get their dish in front of them and they're less happy with it, it opens the conversation for food and wine pairing without condemnation.
All right. Well, that was fantastic. I don't see any other questions in the Q&A right now. If there are, send them in quickly and maybe we'll get to it. Otherwise, we want to promote our next pre-shift in 2 weeks on August 11th. Can you believe it's going to be August in 2 weeks?
No. Where did the summer go?
At 3 p.m. as always, our first sequel, Grapes Aren't Weird, We Are, Part 2.
Indeed.
First one was very interesting. So I wonder how adventurous we're going to get with this next one.
And it's pretty tied to this idea, right? Because when we talked about Grapes Aren't Weird, We Are, the idea is that we get hung up on, we have to have this instead of that. And there's this, 800 individual grapes registered as their own variety in Italy alone, and we're stuck on 5 of them, right? So the idea that we can actually introduce new grapes to people because they're not weird, they're just other grapes. And we talked about 3 last time. We'll pick 2 or 3 for this next one and highlight some grapes that people do like when they are introduced to them, but they have to be introduced.
All right. I look forward to it. Thank you, everyone, for watching, and we hope to see you next time. Stay well, stay safe. Bye, Ron.
Thanks. Bye, TJ.